Federal workers again brace to receive partial paychecks as the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security reaches week 2. Where might Americans soon start noticing the effects? And do Democrats show any signs yet of giving on their demands to overhaul immigration enforcement? Plus, big tech companies prepare to come to Washington next week for what the White House says is a deal to bring their own electricity to all of those new AI data centers.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the WSJ's opinion pages, columnists Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. The partial government shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security drags on after the Senate on Tuesday failed to advance a bill to restore funding. And workers with the Transportation Security Administration this week are preparing to receive partial paychecks. The Coast Guard says on its FAQ page that civilian workers will receive approximately 50% of their next paycheck on or around March 2nd. Kim, you wrote your newsletter last week about the breadth of the Department of Homeland Security and the effects of this under the headline DHS Shutdown, Real Harms. With lots of good information there. Take us through what is being affected and where Americans might be most likely to see it.
There's this attitude in Washington, which is a little mind-boggling to me, that, this is only one agency, one department that's shutting down, and that's so much less important than, obviously, the larger government shutdown that we experienced at the end of last year. And I see that argument in terms of breadth and scope. But in one way, if you look at this, the shutdown of DHS ought to be more concerning than other types of shutdowns in Washington. It's one thing when all the ag department economists aren't working for a few weeks, but this is the agency that was created in the wake of 9/11 and encompasses almost all of the agencies that keep the U.S. secure from both external attack and internal disruption. And while Democrats are focused entirely on border control and immigration and customs issues, this is also the department is responsible for disasters, medical stockpiles, nuclear incident response, infrastructure protection, law enforcement, and training. There are about 260,000 workers at DHS spread across 22 agencies. And there was a really interesting House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing a couple of weeks ago where they had the heads of some of the bigger agencies come in and talk about the problems. So one of them, 56,000 active duty reserve and civilian members of the Coast Guard, are now looking at partial paychecks and soon having to work without pay. Obviously, the Coast Guard patrols our maritime borders and facilitates U.S. shipping commerce. There's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is our frontline protection against attacks on our physical and digital assets. Only about 888 of that agency's 2,300 employees will continue to work as essential workers, albeit without pay, which leaves us a lot more vulnerable to cyber attacks and ongoing initiatives. The Secret Service is part of DHS. Obviously, the vast majority of them are considered mission critical and will continue to work without pay. But the head of that agency noted that the department has an enormous number of big events that they're trying to gear up for, not just this week's State of the Union address, but the FIFA World Cup, the UN General Assembly later this year, the Group of 20 Summit. And then there's obviously the TSA, where screeners are now working, but I would expect to see more of them, especially as they begin to miss paychecks, calling in sick, which is going to snarl the ability for people to get in and get on their planes. And then FEMA, which deals with disasters. And while they're going to continue dealing with ones that come along and some that just happened, like the big recent storms on the East Coast, all of their longer-term disaster work and funding is currently on hold.
The other irony of this shutdown is that the One Big Beautiful Bill last year gave the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, about $75 billion in extra funding. So all of the reporting is that immigration enforcement by the Trump administration is going to continue apace, even while the TSA lines may get snarled. Members of the Coast Guard and so forth are getting partial pay or no pay at all, depending on how long this goes on. And yet the two sides on Capitol Hill seem to be talking past each other, at least for now. Let's listen to a bit from each. First, here is Senate Majority Leader John Thune at a press conference on Wednesday.
Government shutdowns are nobody wins. And you've heard me say that many times. This is an example, really, that we ought to be able to figure this out. We had a deal, and that deal has now been voted down twice on the floor of the Senate by the Democrats. And so the White House, I think, has been in good faith trying to come to the table and work out some of the differences that the Democrats have, but in ways that don't jeopardize or undermine the ability of our law enforcement officials to do their jobs and to do them in a way that keeps them safe. So it's a ongoing conversation. But to your question, if they can figure out a way to pay government employees, absolutely. I mean, these are people who have jobs and have commitments and have families. And, it's going to be really unfortunate if we get to a point where, and I hope we don't, where people aren't getting paid because the Democrats continue to insist on changes to things that are just not going to be feasible or tenable if you want to have law enforcement in this country with the ability to be able to do their jobs.
And here from the other side is the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer.
We sent them a proposal a week ago Monday. We still haven't heard back. Crickets. And so it's in their court. As for getting this done, we all want to see TSA and the other agencies funded. That's up to the Republicans. Very simply, all they have to do is agree with our simple ideas that every police department just about in America follows, and we'll get it all done. It's plain and simple.
Alicia, that is a remarkable message there from Chuck Schumer, whose party does not control any of the levers of government. And that's the dynamic, I think, that leads to shutdown politics, no matter which side is in the minority and doing it, is the voters, in this case, the progressive base of the Democratic Party wants to see Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries fighting President Trump. And so they are obliging here. They put out this list of demands for the ICE overhaul they want to see. And I think they probably know that many things on that list are non-starters politically because they can't get through the Republican majority that controls the Senate and also controls the House. And so it is a bit of it's a bit of a misdirection there, I think, from Schumer to say, just give us everything we want and then the government will reopen when he's the party who has been put out of power by the voters in the last election.
Right. So I think this is a lot of political posturing on the Democrats' part, especially Chuck Schumer. If you recall last spring, he got a lot of flack from his base for conceding too readily to Democrats. And then when we had the shutdown in the last fall, which kind of dragged out over the Obamacare subsidies, again, they really didn't get anything out of it other than an agreement by Republicans to discuss and negotiate and maybe vote on legislation. Now, they didn't end up actually extending those subsidies, and I think at this point that is actually dead. But I think Schumer is feeling a lot of heat from his base on the need to actually fight and maybe try to get something. Now, again, I don't think that they are going to get many of these things on their list. In fact, I think many of the things that they put on their list, for instance, like kind of like judicial warrants, for ICE, as well as kind of micromanaging where ICE can actually do its operations. Those things are, as you point out, are non-starters. Now, I think there's a lot of room for compromise and some common ground. For instance, the administration is already kind of doing body cameras for ICE agents. There's probably a lot of interest in improving training for a lot of these ICE agents. The number actually doubled over the last several months, in part because of the Big Beautiful Bill's big influx of federal funding. So a lot of these ICE agents and CBP for that matter, aren't really trained in, crowd control or dealing with in kind of civilian situations like we saw in Minneapolis. So there's, some common ground where the Democrats and Republicans could agree on what I would call reforms. But many of the things, as they said, that Chuck Schumer is demanding are non-starters with the vast majority of the Republican Congress or the Republican caucus. And so I think this is going to be another futile shutdown like we saw last fall that really won't amount to anything. I think he's going to end up conceding and rolling over again.
And that is the agony of being the party out of power, is your voters want you to do something, but you don't have any power. You have a little bit of leverage, Kim, because funding bills have to go through the Senate and get over a filibuster. So the minority party has to generally, unless there's a 60 vote threshold that the majority holds, which is rare, the minority party has to provide a handful, several votes to allow those funding bills to go through. But that means that the leverage that Chuck Schumer has here is the leverage to inflict pain on the public. And that's that is the basic logic of shutdown politics. Kim, do you see any movement here by Chuck Schumer or the Democrats, any recognition of that reality? Or should Americans brace for this to go on a little while as the federal employees are bracing not to get the pay that they're owed for the jobs that they're doing?
Yeah, I don't see anything happening here until that pain that you mentioned becomes a lot more acute. And that's entirely because Democrats are being very bloody minded about this. It's entirely political for them. I mean, you saw it in the attitude of that Chuck Schumer clip. He's like, oh yeah, I mean, we'd like to see these TSA people get paid, whatnot. I mean, these are tens of thousands of people that are being asked to work without a paycheck. Many of them, I would also note too, are still digging out from having not had a paycheck for weeks and weeks during the last shutdown because they were also affected by that. And this is the same party. I would just like to note that back when DOJ was threatening furloughs and putting people, saying that they were cutting employees at different agencies, this was a party that was howling, talking about the importance of the federal workforce. They don't care about that now because they're trying to please their base. Now, I was very worried that this was what was going to happen because remember, this DHS funding was part of a package of bills alongside other government funding that Democrats cared much more about, largely domestic discretionary pork that they want. And the Republicans had paired that DHS bill with them precisely to get Democratic votes. And as you heard Thune say there, the final package was something that was negotiated by both sides. And then Democrats changed their mind, said we won't vote for anything if DHS is included. The White House made the decision to hive off the DHS bill. And that now means that it is entirely at hostage, at the mercy of Democrats until they get to the point where either their demands are met, which they're not going to be, not at the level that they are currently asking, or until the pain becomes so extreme and there begins to be a backlash that they decide to be in the mood to work things out. This is going to happen soon. But what worries me about this is, again, it's one thing to not have some agriculture department economists working for a couple of weeks. And, most likely what's going to happen here is pain in terms of travelers really struggling to get to their airplanes, for instance. But what worries me more is that we're going to have an incident, something that's going to happen where the Coast Guard wasn't ready to do what it needed to do, where the Secret Service misses something, where, there's a cyber attack from an outside player. I hope none of that happens, but those are the kind of stakes that they're playing with here.
Let's turn to the big meeting expected next week at the White House. Some of the participants reportedly including Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI. And the White House is saying this is an agreement about power, electricity for data centers, which is an issue President Trump mentioned in his State of the Union address. Let's listen to that clip.
Many Americans are also concerned that energy demand from AI data centers could unfairly drive up their electric utility bills. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that I have negotiated the new Ratepayer Protection Pledge. You know what that is? We're telling the major tech companies that they have the obligation to provide for their own power needs. They can build their own power plants as part of their factory so that no one's prices will go up. And in many cases, prices of electricity will go down for the community, and very substantially down. This is a unique strategy never used in this country before. We have an old grid. It could never handle the kind of numbers, the amount of electricity that's needed. So I'm telling them they can build their own plant. They're going to produce their own electricity. It will ensure the company's ability to get electricity while at the same time lowering prices of electricity for you, and could be very substantial for all of you cities and towns. You're going to see some good things happen over the next number of years.
Alicia, how much electricity demand is projected to come from data centers in coming years? And what do you make of this sort of BYOE policy, bring your own electricity? Is that a good idea?
So I think you are starting to see demand from these AI data centers, which, by the way, can consume as much power as an entire cities, increasing. And almost, I wouldn't say it's increasing exponentially, but a lot over the last several years. For instance, in 2020, they were about 2% of electric demand, and now they're going up to around 12% of nationwide electric demand, and that's because they consume a ton of power just doing queries. An AI query can require up to 100 times as much power than a simple search Google query. Now, the issue here is that the supply of power hasn't been keeping up with the demand, especially over the last decade, where you actually saw a lot of baseload power plants, nuclear and coal in particular, close. And that was in large part because they became uneconomic due to renewable subsidies as well as cheap natural gas. And so you have this demand curve that's increasing pretty steeply while the supply curve has been flat or declining. Now you are seeing like more renewables come onto the grid, solar and wind, and a little bit of battery power, but those do not provide the reliable power that data centers need around the clock. So what you're actually seeing already happen is that many these quote unquote hyperscalers are going out into the market and trying to build their own power plants because of delays connecting to the grid. The grid will not connect you a data center, or for that matter, many factories, unless there's sufficient power. So in some cases, like Microsoft is now trying to revive the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania to power its data centers. And Meta is now reached or cut some agreements for some advanced nuclear reactors, though those probably won't be available for another decade as the technology is still pretty immature. XAI, Elon Musk's AI startup, has actually kind of jury-rigged some small gas turbines to provide to build a gas plant in Tennessee. And the reason I say jury-rigged is because there's actually a nationwide and global shortage of gas turbines for power plants. So you're seeing a lot of innovation, finding different ways to nevertheless try to procure and build that kind of fossil fuel or nuclear baseload power. And one of my favorite stories is that now even old jet engines from military planes are now being retrofitted to provide some kind of power for these for these data centers. So I think it does make sense to do this, especially because as the demand increases on the grid, you are starting to see a backlash, especially in the PJM territory in the Northeast, where a lot of these data centers are clustered. And one reason is because some states like Virginia in particular, but also Illinois, subsidize them heavily. So in these areas, there's the marginal cost or wholesale cost of electricity is really increasing, especially when there's storms or such. And those the higher costs do get passed down to the customers. One other thing I would point out that you're starting to see is states revise their electric rates in tiers. So traditionally data centers would be considered quote unquote industrial businesses, and they would actually get preferential lower rates, much lower rates than other businesses and homeowners. So now many states are actually adopting new rate tiers for data centers because their marginal demand or strain on their grid is much higher than other businesses. And so that's another way that to make these data centers bear the cost for the extra load on the grid.
Kim, a first premise that I would throw out here is that the U.S. cannot afford to lose the AI race to China. And the China build out of AI, like a lot of things, I think, is powered by coal. China keeps building coal power plants at a pretty good clip. And to the extent that there is this backlash against big tech, but particularly data centers, calls by people like Bernie Sanders to crack down on data center construction, but echoed in some quarters of the right, maybe it makes sense to respond to that. I mean, I'm skeptical that that is really what is driving increased electricity prices for consumers, average homeowners in many of these states, particularly given we have years now of blue state policies in states like New Jersey, where they don't want fossil fuels coming in. They want to put on clean power mandates, blocking natural gas, which is pretty plentiful in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania from coming into the state. And so I'm not quite sure how much of the frustrations of ratepayers of increasing prices is actually coming from these data centers. But if there's a political problem here that is going to slow the U.S. rollout of AI and act as a crimp in this race with Beijing, I mean, maybe President Trump is right about trying to do something about that.
Yeah, if you step back and you look at this, the economic story from a 30,000 foot perspective, here's what you've got. You've had a Democratic Party, progressive politics for 15, 20 years now has been on this drive, this march to shut down reliable, cheap fossil fuel and nuclear power in the name of climate change. And in the name of moving to this fantasy world of renewable energy. That is increasingly, as we step into this new world of AI, which requires massive energy production, in which it is essential that the United States maintain its lead and outbeat its adversaries. That at me is looking increasingly, that Democratic policy, like one of the dumbest economic policies, one of the worst decisions that we have made in decades. And so what you see here now is the Trump administration trying to turn a bad situation into a better one or into a good one. A lot of credit in my mind goes to Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who behind the scenes, and Trump kind of gave him a little nod in the audience when he was giving the State of the Union. But what he's trying to do is sort of twofold, which is say, okay, look, this is a problem, but how can we make this better? So the energy companies, the data centers and these hyperscalers, as Alicia noted, are being given a very clear choice. And it's the stick part of it is, look, if you're not going to step up and make your own energy, you're going to end up paying significantly higher electric rates, or you may end up having to have your power curtailed when there are shortages, such as when there are storms. But on the other side, and this is the carrot side of it, you step up and you do this. We're going to help you with permitting. We're going to maybe even really create an environment where we can have some real advances in innovation and energy production. One area I would note, which has just been left behind, but there's now all this renewed interest, as Alicia was noting, was in new forms of nuclear energy, new ways of producing it, and more economical. You've got Musk's experiment with sort of jerry-rigging older equipment to see if you can make it work again. And so there's a chance here both to innovate, make it easier for not just these hyperscalers, but other electrical entities to create power more cheaply in a better way. And this, in turn, could benefit consumers because, as Trump was saying, one of the benefits of this is that they get this online and get it going out. It could mean excess energy to be put out on the grid that could lower costs and manage demand in addition to what the hyperscalers need. So this is the race for the future. And, at least the administration has a plan. There's a long way to go. And as Alicia noted, some of these plans can, it takes a while. You can't just stand up power overnight. But you have to start with a plan, and this is at least something.
Thank you, Kim and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.